This show goes from high on space drugs to High School Musical. Every episode is like a little surprise toy, except instead of a mystery toy, it's Schrodinger's cat. You either get a cute little kitty cat, or you get childhood trauma. Either way, it will probably be an experience that's hard to forget. This show has amazing animation and a banger soundtrack. This show is underrated and underappreciated. This show is Space Dandy! Whoa, yeah, Space Dandy! Oh yeah, Space Dandy! Oh yeah, Space Dandy, Space Dandy. Space Dandy is a dandy guy. In space. He's a bounty hunter that tries to find and capture rare aliens for money, but he's absolutely horrible at it. Dandy's crew consists of a talking cat named Meow and a vacuum cleaner that comes pre-installed with annoying fucking auto-tune. I don't know who decided that auto-tune makes you sound like a fucking robot, but it doesn't. I don't know what else to say about that. Other notable characters include a redhead, an evil monkey, an eggplant head, the narrator, and a Hooters waitress. Space Dandy is a dandy guy, but you already knew that. The real question is, what does it mean to be a dandy guy? Well, the dictionary describes dandy as a man unduly devoted to style, neatness, and fashion in dress and appearance. I wouldn't in a million years use a single one of those words to describe dandy. He's broke, not very smart, and he can be kind of an asshole and a pervert sometimes. Okay, maybe most times. Dandy isn't a great guy if you couldn't tell. But when I say he's not a great guy, I mean it quite literally. He's not a great guy. He's not perfect, he's average. And that's what makes Dandy, Dandy. Even though I wouldn't say I relate to Dandy on a personal level, he's a very human character that's hard not to relate to just on a basic human level. Don't get me wrong, Dandy is still a cartoon character, but he's a cartoon character that I could see having a real life counterpart somewhere out in the world. Or space, I guess. Okay, so now that I've somewhat introduced you to Space Dandy, the character, I think it's about time that I introduce you to Space Dandy, the show. Space Dandy was directed and partially written by Shinichiro Watanabe, who's also the director of Cowboy Bebop and Samurai Champloo. Knowing how successful Bebop was in the States, they decided to release Space Dandy with an English dub on release. So on January 4th, 2014, Space Dandy's first ever episode was aired on Adult Swim at 11:30 p.m. in the United States of America, baby! With a handful of big names working on the project, it was bound to be a success. Not only because the show was probably going to be good with the talent they had, but also because it was airing on the same channel that Bebop did back when it first aired in the US. They marketed the show as from the creators of Soul Eater, Full Metal Alchemist, and of course Cowboy Bebop. And there were a few others that they didn't even bother to mention. But maybe they should have. You see, the show flopped. It was a commercial failure both in the US and in Japan as far as I can tell. While it was received fairly well by the few who stayed to watch the full series, it seemed that most didn't stay for long. Maybe they didn't promote the show enough. Or maybe they relied too much on the fans of Cowboy Bebop to watch a brand new show that came out 13 years after Bebop first aired. One other possible contributing factor to the unsuccessfulness of Space Dandy is that at the same time there was another animated sci-fi comedy with a somewhat unlikable main character that would also go on mostly episodic adventures, both airing on the same channel. But even if that wasn't the reason for Space Dandy's failure, by 2014 things already started switching away from cable and streaming had become most people's platform of choice. The streaming game was at an all-time high compared to the previous years. People were already getting used to the binge model of television, and because of that, people started to become less and less inclined to watch episodic shows. You know, your Twilight Zones, your Seinfelds, and your Wizards of Waverly Places. At the end of the day, I can only speculate why Space Dandy didn't find success. But maybe it was doomed to be a cult classic from the start. Put simply, I don't think Space Dandy is a show for everyone. It's not the kind of thing you can just throw on the TV and watch with your friends and or family, in my opinion. Especially not your family. Space Dandy is the kind of show that I feel like I need to explain to somebody before turning it on, whereas for Cowboy Bebop, I feel like I can just turn it on without the fear of someone thinking I'm a perverted weirdo. Just to be clear, I'm not saying Cowboy Bebop is a show for everyone. I just think it has a much wider appeal than Space Dandy. I'm not comparing the quality of these two shows, but I do think it's important to point out the fact that Space Dandy was never going to be the next Cowboy Bebop when it comes to popularity. One look at Cowboy Bebop and you get it. It's a space western thingamabob. One look at Space Dandy and you go, what the fuck am I looking at? And there's nothing wrong with that. I like weird shit, and I'm not afraid to admit it. Who cares if something isn't normal? Fiction isn't normal. Are you seriously gonna tell me that a guy flying around in spandex shooting lasers out of his eyes is normal? Didn't think so. The only reason why shit like that is quote-unquote normal is because it's been done before. Space Dandy isn't the weirdest thing I've seen, but it definitely has not been done before. For the most part, every episode is its own thing. And part of the reason why every episode is so unique is because almost every episode has a different director, writer, animation director, and storyboard artist. You might be a little confused since before I said Watanabe was the director, and while that is true, he was the director of the series. He was never credited as an episode director, which is completely normal. However, a series director's job is to manage the project as a whole. If one episode is different from the others, then that's usually because of the episode director and or writer. It seems to me like Watanabe took a fairly hands-off approach to directing Space Dandy, letting whoever was working on the project to basically do whatever they wanted, but that's just what I think. I'm not saying that I think Watanabe didn't work on the series. He wrote 3 episodes and co-wrote 1, and I don't think the series would be what it is without him. He obviously had a lot of influence over the show, but a lot of people worked on Space Dandy, a total of 9 writers and 22 directors. And pretty much all of them had a unique creative vision for Space Dandy, so I don't think it's fair to give Watanabe 100% of the credit. A lot of writers and directors on Space Dandy had their own unique styles, some of which are so unique that you can tell who was behind the episode if you know what you're looking for. Someone that comes to mind is To-In-Jo. This guy is an award-winning science fiction writer and a physicist that worked as a researcher for 7 years, and his PhD is in mathematical physical study on the natural language. $10 says you can't tell me what that means. Hell, fucking Google can't tell me what that means. I still don't understand how they got this guy to write for Space Dandy of all things, but I'm glad they did. He wrote 2 episodes, and when I first learned who To-In-Jo was, I immediately knew one of the episodes he wrote. They're not my favorite episodes of the series, but Space Dandy wouldn't be Space Dandy if the episodes didn't have a shit ton of variety, and To-In-Jo is one of the many that adds to that variety. Except it's in a nerdy, sci-fi kind of way. I don't know where to put this, so I'm just putting it here. Episode 9 reminds me of the video game Cocoon. No other episode reminds me of that whatsoever. That's it. That's all I wanted to say. Literally, that's it. I don't know. I don't know why I felt like I needed to put this here. Because most episodes are completely different from each other, it's hard to describe the show. Even some of the episodes alone are already difficult to describe. But if I were to describe the series as a whole, I would say Space Dandy feels like a Studio Ghibli production. If you didn't know already, Hayao Miyazaki is the man who wrote and directed most of Studio Ghibli's popular works. Even if the name Studio Ghibli doesn't ring a bell, you've probably at least heard of Miyazaki's work. My Neighbor Totoro, Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, Ponyo, and more recently, The Boy and the Heron. Miyazaki is known for his movies that recreate the feeling of being a kid, a feeling that most of us have long forgotten, a glimpse into the mind and imagination of a child, so to speak. Okay, now what does this have to do with Space Dandy? It's not really the kind of thing you should be showing to a young child, nor does it recreate the feeling of being a young child, but at least for me, Space Dandy does recreate something. It recreates the feeling of being a teenager, and or preteen, I guess. I don't know how to phrase this without it sounding like an absolute insult, but Space Dandy feels like it could have actually been made by a teenager. Just like how Studio Ghibli films feel like they could have been made by a 4-year-old. And I know, usually when someone says that something feels like it could have been made by the underdeveloped brain of a mini human being, they don't usually mean it as a compliment, and trust me, I wouldn't take it as one either. But it's less like they feel like they were actually made by children, and more like they were made with the creativity of kids. Now, when I say teenager, I'm not talking about like 19-year-olds. I'm more referring to like 13-year-olds, give or take a couple years. I don't think it's something you can put an exact number on, especially because everyone grows up at their own rate. But if I were to describe it, I would say it's the age where you're still dreaming big like you used to, but your expectations are slightly more realistic. The age where you're doodling without a care in the world, but most people can actually tell what you're drawing without an explanation. And it's the age where you're a little smarter with every passing day, but you're still stupid as fuck. While Ghibli movies are often an homage to the wonders of early childhood, Space Dandy is an homage to early teenhood. Remember how I said Dandy is broke, dumb, and a bit of an ass and a perv? Well, I don't know about you, but that just sounds like the description of a kid to me. Dandy isn't a shitty person. He's just a stupid kid. He's a boob-obsessed teen who doesn't know where he's going in life. Dandy himself is the homage to teenhood. I watched Space Dandy for the first time only a couple months ago, and while I did enjoy it, I wish I could go back in time and show Space Dandy to my younger self. because I probably would have loved it even more than I do now. An alien bounty hunter with a robot sidekick and an alien cat named Meow just feels like some bullshit young me would have thought of. I think it's funny when people say stuff like Space Dandy is actually horrible because the plot is bad and moves way too slow. My response to that is, what plot? Now, I would be lying to you if I said Space Dandy has no plot whatsoever, but like I said before, for the most part, every episode is its own thing. I would say you get a good feel for what the show is like just from watching one episode. And I think that's the real reason why people didn't watch Space Dandy. They decided Space Dandy just wasn't for them. And again, this is all speculation. I can't read minds or anything, but I think most people were probably just indifferent to the show, neither loving or hating it. It is what it is, and if you don't like what it is, then don't watch it. Me personally, I don't get why someone wouldn't like it, but I think maybe people just go into it with the wrong mindset. You know, thinking it's something it's not. If you haven't seen Space Dandy already, go watch an episode, please. See if you like it. The episodes are only 20 minutes long, and one episode is all you really need to make up your mind, in my opinion. This is literally my first video on this channel, so if you liked what you saw, please subscribe, because I literally have 0 subscribers. And if you didn't like this video, please let me know what you didn't like about it. Let me know what you disagree with, what you agree with. Either way, please let me know what you thought of this video so I can make the next one even dandier.